It began on a quiet Sunday evening. The kind of evening where the mundane comfort of life felt unshakable. Sophia was curled up on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her, her tablet balanced precariously on one knee. I was seated across from her in my usual chair, the television murmuring in the background while I skimmed a book I'd been meaning to finish for months. It should have been one of those nights where nothing changed, where the gentle hum of domesticity wrapped around us like a blanket. But Sophia had a look. It wasn't quite nervous, but something stirred behind her eyes, a flicker of unease. I didn't notice at first, lost in my pages, until she cleared her throat softly. "Joseph," she began, setting the tablet aside. Her tone was careful, deliberate. The kind of tone you use when testing icy waters. "There's something I've been thinking about. Something I'd like to talk to you about." I glanced up from my book. Her face was calm, almost too calm, as though she'd rehearsed this moment. "Sure," I said, closing the book and giving her my full attention. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit. "We've been together a long time," she began, her voice soft. "And I love you, Joseph. You know that, right?" "Of course," I replied, though her words didn't have the comforting effect she likely intended. My heart began to beat a little faster. "Where's this coming from?" She sighed, leaning forward slightly, as if to bridge the gap between us. "I've been thinking about our relationship. About ways to make it stronger, to keep things fresh and exciting." I didn't like where this was going. My brows furrowed. "Sophia, if there's something wrong, just say it. What's on your mind?" She hesitated again, and then the words came, slow and measured, like she was carefully choosing each one. "I want us to consider opening our relationship." For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard her correctly. The words hung in the air between us, impossible to miss but equally difficult to believe. "Opening our relationship?" I echoed, my voice hardening despite myself. "What are you talking about?" "I've been reading," she said quickly, as if to explain herself. "About couples who explore this, who give each other the freedom to experience other people while still being committed to each other. It's not about love or replacing what we have. It's about exploring, about growth." I set my book down, leaning forward to meet her gaze. "Exploring? Growth? Sophia, are you seriously asking me to let you sleep with other people?" She flinched at my bluntness but didn't look away. "It's not just about that," she insisted. "It's about being honest about our needs, about not letting things get stale." "Stale?" I cut her off, my voice rising. "You think our marriage is stale? Sophia, we have a child together. A life together. And now you're telling me that's not enough for you?" Her eyes pleaded with me, her hands wringing nervously in her lap. "It's not about not being enough, Joseph. I love you. But I also want to experience more. I've been feeling restless." "Restless," I repeated, my tone dripping with disbelief. "You know what? No. No way. I'm not even entertaining this. Joseph, please." "No," I said firmly, standing now, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Sophia, you're asking me to tear apart the foundation of our marriage for what? A fling? A passing whim? I won't do it. I won't live like that." Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were from frustration or sadness. "You're not even willing to talk about it?" she asked, her voice breaking. "To try and understand where I'm coming from?" "Understand?" I laughed bitterly, though there was no humor in it. "Sophia, this isn't some new hobby you're asking me to support. You're asking me to share my wife with someone else. Do you hear how insane that sounds?" She stood too, her face flushed now, anger rising to meet mine. "It's not insane, Joseph. There are plenty of couples who make it work, who are happier for it. Why does it have to mean we're falling apart?" "Because we are." I shot back. "If you're even asking me this, something's already broken. You don't fix a marriage by bringing in other people, Sophia. You fight for what you have." Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought she might let it go. But then she whispered, "What if fighting isn't enough anymore?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, searching for the woman I thought I knew, the partner I'd built my life with. But in that moment, she felt like a stranger. I shook my head, stepping back. "If you're so desperate to experience more, then go. But I won't be part of it. I'll never be part of it." Joseph, wait, she called as I turned away, but I didn't stop. I needed space, needed air. I left the room, her voice trailing after me, her words echoing in my mind. In my heart, I knew this was just the beginning. The first fracture in a foundation I wasn't sure we could repair. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee in front of me, staring at the newspaper I hadn't bothered to read. The house was still. Sophia had left early, claiming she had an important meeting at work. I didn't ask for details, and she didn't offer them. Her words from the night before were stuck in my head, a stubborn echo I couldn't shake. What if fighting isn't enough anymore? I ran my hands over my face, trying to push the thought away. But something didn't sit right. Restlessness? Growth? No. This wasn't about exploring. Sophia was up to something, and deep down, I knew it. After a while, I went upstairs to grab my wallet from the nightstand. Her phone was on the bed, buzzing softly. It wasn't locked, and before I could talk myself out of it, I picked it up. The first thing I saw was a notification banner for a text message from someone named Tara, one of her coworkers, as far as I knew. But the text wasn't about work. Tara, Friday at 7 works. Same place. He says he can't wait to see you. I stared at the message, my pulse pounding in my ears. My first instinct was to dismiss it, to tell myself it didn't mean what it looked like. But my gut had been screaming at me for weeks now, and this was too much to ignore. Who was he? Why was Tara involved? I clicked on the thread. The conversation was short but damning. Sophia, thanks for helping. He's so paranoid these days, I can't do anything without him watching. Tara, no worries. Just let me know when you need cover again. Sophia, Friday should be the last time, I think. Then we'll see. My breath caught in my chest. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I put the phone down like it was on fire and walked out of the room, trying to make sense of what I'd just read. There was no denying it now. She was lying to me. Worse, she was using her friends to cover for her. And he wasn't me. For the rest of the day, I went through the motions, my mind spinning. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront her right away, to throw the phone in her face and demand answers. But the other part of me, the colder, more calculating part, knew I needed to be smart about this. If she was already lying to me, who knew what else she'd hidden? I had to find out the truth. That night, I didn't sleep. When Sophia came home, she acted like nothing had happened. She kissed my cheek, made small talk, and climbed into bed as if everything was fine. I couldn't even look at her. Instead, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. Who was the man she was meeting? How long had this been going on? And how had I missed it? The next day, I started digging. I checked our bank accounts, looking for unusual charges. Sure enough, there were transactions I didn't recognize, dinners at expensive restaurants, charges at a boutique hotel downtown, even a florist I'd never heard of. My stomach twisted with each discovery. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. I needed more. That afternoon, I called Ryan. It wasn't easy, but I had to know how much he was involved. When he answered, his voice was cautious. Hey, Joe. Everything okay? No, I said flatly. We need to talk. We met at a coffee shop a few blocks from my office. Ryan looked uneasy as he slid into the seat across from me. What's going on? He asked. I didn't bother with pleasantries. Sophia. What else haven't you told me? His face went pale, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. Joe, Don't lie to me, I said, my voice low but sharp. You told me she asked you to, whatever. I need the rest. All of it. He hesitated, then let out a long sigh. She's been acting weird for months. I didn't think it was my place to get involved, but when she brought me into it, he stopped, running a hand through his hair. I thought you knew. I thought you two had talked about it. Talked about what? I pressed. She's been seeing someone, he admitted. I don't know who. She didn't tell me. She just said it was someone from work. My heart dropped. I felt sick. You didn't think to tell me this before. I didn't know how, Joe. She made it sound like you were on board, like it was some kind of agreement between you two. Does this look like an agreement to you? I snapped, shoving the printouts of the bank statements across the table. Ryan stared at the evidence, his mouth opening and closing like he didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I didn't want to believe it either." That night, I sat in the dark living room, waiting for Sophia to come home. She walked in around 9, her hair slightly disheveled, her makeup touched up but not enough to hide the exhaustion on her face. "You're late," I said, my voice calm but cold. She froze in the doorway, her keys dangling in her hand. "I told you I had a meeting." "No, you didn't," I said, standing. "You lied." Again. Her face fell, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then she sighed and set her purse down. "Joseph, I can explain." "I don't want your excuses, Sophia," I said, my voice rising. "I want the truth." "Who is he?" Her eyes widened, and she took a step back. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "Tara. The texts. The hotel charges. I know everything." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. And in that silence, I saw it, the truth I'd been dreading. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. The betrayal was complete, and in that moment, I knew there was no going back. Sophia stood there, frozen, her face pale as if all the color had drained out of it. She knew I wasn't bluffing. I had the evidence, and there was no point in trying to deny it now. I could see the wheels turning in her head, searching for an explanation, an excuse, anything that might make me believe this wasn't what it so clearly was. "Joseph," she began, her voice shaking, "it's not what you think." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "It's exactly what I think, Sophia. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But instead, she straightened, a flicker of defiance flashing in her eyes. "I was going to tell you," she said quietly. "I just." "Tell me what?" "That you've been sneaking around behind my back. That you've been using your friends to cover for you while you cheat on me." My voice cracked, the anger spilling over. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she shot back, her voice rising now. "I didn't plan for this to happen, Joseph. I was unhappy. We've been so distant." "Unhappy?" I cut her off, my voice cold. "You think this is how you fix that? By lying to me? By sneaking around with someone else?" She flinched, but I didn't stop. "You had a choice, Sophia. You could have come to me. We could have worked on this together. But instead, you decided that your happiness was more important than our marriage. Than our family." Tears welled up in her eyes now, but they did nothing to soften the anger burning in my chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Sorry?" I repeated, shaking my head. "You're sorry because you got caught." Her silence told me everything I needed to know. "I want a name," I said, stepping closer. "Who is he?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." I roared, my voice echoing in the room. "Tell me his name, Sophia." She closed her eyes, as if bracing herself. "It's Mark," she said finally. "He works with me." Mark. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know him, but I pictured him anyway, a smug, self-satisfied guy who thought he could take what wasn't his. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. "How long?" I asked through gritted teeth. She hesitated again, but one look at my face told her she couldn't lie. "About 6 months." 6 months. Half a year. Half a year of lies, of betrayal, of her coming home and looking me in the eye as if nothing had changed. I felt sick. "Does he know about me?" I asked, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. She nodded slowly. "He knows I'm married." But it wasn't like that at first. "Don't," I said sharply, cutting her off. "Don't try to make this sound better than it is. You cheated on me, Sophia. Plain and simple." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock on the wall. I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven, as if she was holding herself together by a thread. But I didn't care. My sympathy had been buried under the weight of her betrayal. "I want you to leave," I said finally, my voice cold and steady. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Joseph, please. Can't we?" "No," I said firmly. "We can't. You made your choice, Sophia. Now you have to live with it." "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, her voice trembling. What about our son? I'll take care of him, I said. You can go stay with your friend Tara. She seems to know all about your little escapades anyway. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But then she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Okay, she whispered. I'll pack a bag. I watched her walk up the stairs, her footsteps slow and heavy. Part of me wanted to feel relief, but all I felt was a hollow ache in my chest. This was the woman I'd built my life with, the mother of my child. And now, all of it was unraveling. When she came back down, a small suitcase in her hand, she stopped in the doorway. I'm sorry, Joseph, she said again, her voice barely audible. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just watched as she walked out the door, the sound of it closing behind her echoing in the empty house. For a long time, I stood there, staring at the spot where she'd been. My mind was racing, filled with anger and sadness and a million unanswered questions. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I never thought I'd need. Hey, it's Joseph, I said when the lawyer answered. I need to talk to you. It's about a divorce. 2 days passed after Sophia left, but the ache in my chest didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. The house felt empty without her, and every corner held a memory I didn't want to face. I threw myself into being there for our son, Ethan, who was too young to understand why Mommy wasn't home. Where's Mommy? He asked, his big blue eyes, her eyes, looking up at me while I tucked him into bed. She's staying with a friend for a little while, buddy, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But I'm here, okay? Always. He nodded, trusting me in the way only a child could, and drifted off to sleep. I stayed by his bedside longer than usual that night, listening to his soft breaths, wondering how I was going to protect him from the fallout that was bound to come. The next morning, I sat in my lawyer's office, flipping through a pile of documents. His name was Tim Garber, a no-nonsense guy with a reputation for being ruthless in court. He'd come highly recommended by a friend who'd been through a messy divorce. Tim adjusted his glasses and leaned back in his chair. You've got a strong case for custody, Joseph, he said. You're the primary caregiver, and Sophia's behavior, well, let's just say it's not going to win her any favors with a judge. Good, I said firmly. Because I'm not letting her take Ethan. Tim nodded. We'll need to document everything. Do you have evidence of her infidelity? I pulled out a folder I'd prepared, screenshots of her texts with Tara, bank statements showing charges for hotel stays, and a printed copy of her admission about Mark. Tim flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. This is solid, he said finally. It's not just about the affair, it's about her judgment, her priorities. If she's been lying to you, she's been lying to herself too. Judges don't like that. Hearing that gave me a flicker of hope, but it wasn't enough. What about Mark? I asked. Can we use him? Tim's eyes narrowed. If he's been around your son or interfering in your marriage, absolutely. Do you have his full name? Mark Dawson, I said, my voice tight. Works with her at the marketing firm. Tim made a note. I'll run a background check. If there's anything there, anything at all, we'll find it. Later that day, I couldn't shake the need to confront Mark. I wanted to look him in the eye, to see the man who thought he could worm his way into my family. I knew where Sophia worked, so I decided to pay him a visit. Walking into that sleek office building, I felt out of place in my jeans and flannel shirt. The receptionist at the front desk gave me a polite but questioning look. Can I help you? She asked. I'm here to see Mark Dawson, I said, keeping my tone even. Do you have an appointment? No, I admitted. But it's urgent. She hesitated, glancing at her computer. One moment. She picked up the phone, murmuring something too quietly for me to hear. Then she looked back at me. He's in a meeting right now. Can I take a message? I clenched my fists at my sides. No, I'll wait. Taking a seat in the lobby, I could feel my anger building with every passing second. I didn't care how long it took, Mark was going to face me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a man stepped out of the elevator. He was tall, with neatly styled dark hair and a tailored suit that screamed corporate. His confidence was palpable, the kind of self-assuredness that comes from thinking the rules don't apply to you. This had to be him. Mark Dawson. I called, standing. He turned, looking mildly surprised. Yes. I didn't wait for an invitation. I walked right up to him, my chest tight with rage. I'm Joseph. Sophia's husband. For a split second, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. Then he composed himself, offering a hand like we were old friends. Joseph. Nice to meet you. I ignored his hand. We need to talk. Now. He glanced around, clearly aware of the curious eyes in the lobby. I don't think this is the place. I don't care what you think, I snapped. You've been sneaking around with my wife for months, and now you're going to tell me why. His confident facade cracked just enough to show he was rattled. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. Let's go somewhere private. We ended up in a small conference room down the hall. As soon as the door closed, I rounded on him. How long? I demanded. He sighed, loosening his tie. Look, I didn't plan for any of this to happen, okay? Sophia and I. Don't say her name, I interrupted, my voice cold. Just answer the question. 6 months, he admitted reluctantly. But it wasn't just about that. We connected. She needed someone to talk to. Talk to? I scoffed. That's your excuse. You think you're her savior or something? Mark had the nerve to look indignant. It's not like you were giving her what she needed. She was miserable, Joseph. Lonely. Maybe if you'd paid more attention. The words hit me like a slap. I took a step closer, my fists clenched. You don't know a damn thing about my marriage. About my family. You're just some smug, self-serving. Stop, he said, raising a hand. I get it. You're angry. You have every right to be. But Sophia made her own choices. Don't pin this all on me. I stared at him, my blood boiling. Part of me wanted to hit him, to wipe that calm expression off his face. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped back, my voice low and steady. You're going to stay away from her. From my family. Do you understand me? He didn't answer right away, but eventually he nodded. Fine. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Sorry wouldn't fix what he'd broken. When I got home that night, I felt drained, like I'd been fighting a war on every front. But as I checked on Ethan, sleeping soundly in his bed, I knew I couldn't stop now. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting him from the storm that was still gathering. And I wasn't going to lose. The courtroom was colder than I expected, its sterile air heavy with tension. The faint murmur of voices echoed off the high ceilings as I sat at the plaintiff's table, my lawyer Tim at my side. Across the room, Sophia sat with her attorney, her face a pale mask of worry. She couldn't bring herself to look at me, her gaze fixed on her hands clasped tightly in her lap. This was the culmination of everything, the lies, the betrayal, the weeks of gathering evidence, and the endless sleepless nights wondering how we had gotten here. Today, I wasn't just fighting for a divorce. I was fighting for Ethan, for the life I promised to give him, free from the chaos Sophia had invited into our home. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Proceedings began, and Tim was relentless, laying out the facts with a calm precision that was devastating in its clarity. The texts, the bank statements, the testimony from Tara, all of it painted a damning picture of Sophia's choices. But it was the DNA test that delivered the final blow. This document, Tim said, holding up the results, proves that Ethan is not biologically Joseph's son. However, it also proves that he has been the primary caregiver, the stable figure in Ethan's life. Joseph has provided for him, nurtured him, and built a bond that no biological tie can replace. Sophia's lawyer tried to push back, claiming that her infidelity didn't make her an unfit mother. But then, Tim introduced Mark into the equation. We've also discovered, Tim said, his voice steady, that Sophia's affair partner, Mark Dawson, has a record of financial instability and reckless behavior. This is the person Sophia has chosen to entangle in her life, and potentially, her child's life. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs. Sophia's face crumpled as Mark's background was laid bare, gambling debts, a failed marriage and a history of job hopping. It was clear she hadn't known the full extent of who she'd been involved with, but now, everyone in the room did. When it was Sophia's turn to speak, she looked fragile, her voice trembling as she addressed the judge. I made mistakes, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. But I love my son. I don't want to lose him. Her words stirred something in me. For all her faults, I knew she loved Ethan. But love wasn't enough, not when her choices had endangered everything we'd built. Finally, the judge delivered the verdict. Custody of Ethan will remain with Joseph. Sophia will have visitation rights, pending further review. As for the division of assets, the court finds that Joseph's financial stability and contributions to the family warrant the terms outlined in the prenuptial agreement. It was over. The weight I'd carried for months lifted, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like survival. That evening, I took Ethan to the park, needing to clear my head. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the playground as he ran toward the swings. His laughter rang out, a sound so pure it cut through the haze of everything that had happened. "Higher, Daddy," he shouted, his grin wide as I pushed him. In that moment, I realized something. Sophia's choices had shattered the life we built, but they hadn't destroyed me. They hadn't destroyed us. Ethan was my anchor, my reason to keep going, and I wouldn't let anything take that away. Later, as we drove home, Ethan dozed off in the back seat. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his small face peaceful in the glow of the passing streetlights. I thought about Sophia, about the life we'd once imagined, and about the man I used to be before all of this. When we pulled into the driveway, I carried Ethan inside and tucked him into bed. I lingered for a moment, brushing a hand over his hair. "I'll always fight for you," I whispered. The house was quiet as I sat alone in the living room, the weight of the day finally settling in. I knew there were more battles ahead, co-parenting with Sophia, navigating the scars left behind, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of peace. The doorbell rang, jolting me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Sophia standing there, her face streaked with tears. She looked at me, searching for something, understanding, forgiveness, maybe both. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." I nodded, but I didn't invite her in. "You need to figure out who you are, Sophia. For yourself. And for Ethan. But you can't do that here." Her shoulders slumped, and she turned to leave. I watched her walk away, a part of me aching for what we'd lost, but knowing it was time to let it go. As I closed the door, the weight finally lifted. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't consumed by what she'd done or the pain she'd caused. I was focused on what mattered most, Ethan, and the life we were going to build together. A life free from lies. A life filled with love, truth, and hope for a better tomorrow. And as I stood there in the quiet house, I realized something: this wasn't the end. It was a new beginning.